Highlighting a product and making it look and feel its best is a very difficult task as a cinematographer. Any successful product commercial feels perfect, from its camera movements, acting, and especially how they are lit. There are so many ways to execute this, but where do you even start? In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how you can do that by going over a recent commercial we shot. I'm going to be going over lighting diagrams and camera movements and show you exactly how we shot this. Before we even get into the breakdown, I'd like to give you guys some context about this project and how it was planned in the span of 5 days. This was because we were given the Sony Bravano to shoot a commercial with in a short period of time. 5 days to plan a production is very unideal. But there are so many pre-production tools that make this planning process so much easier. The specific one that we're going to talk about in this project was Framset, which helped us align on the overall look and feel, as well as camera movements we wanted for this project. Framset has an extensive catalog of movies, commercials, and music videos that we use all the time to plan our projects. And I'm going to dive into it right now to show you exactly how we did this. Finding references is one of my favorite processes in the pre-production process because it just gets me so excited about the whole project. And specifically, Framset has a catalog of movies, commercials, and music videos, and then has still portions as well as motion kind of GIFs to really showcase exactly what you're going for in your specific commercial or whatever project you're doing. So how I use this for this commercial specifically, I use the commercials tab, and then for this, we're looking for something that's high key in beauty. So I would say beauty commercial. And from there, I have a bunch of references that are looking pretty aligned in terms of what we were looking for this project. And if I wanted even something more specific in terms of the motions tab, it gives me a lot of fun references to play with. And with some of these, we actually added to our catalog that we're using. So if I like this still here and I wanted to add it to a specific folder, we had one for Salt and Stone, which was this project. And I can go to my sets folder here, and we have them for a bunch of projects that we were actually working on. So this really helped the director, Jason, and I really align in terms of what we're doing, what the product shots are supposed to be looking like. Framset was an essential tool for this commercial because it helped us really align with all departments and really speed up the planning process in terms of executing this commercial. If you guys are interested in signing up for Framset, use the link in the description to find out more. And this commercial was a stepping stone for us, putting together a piece that would be really good for our product reel and really showcase a camera that was new to the market and how it works in a commercial setting. This project was supposed to feel very unworldly, very commercial from its movements and especially its lighting and direction. We have a lot of slow motion movements in here and a lot of different camera movements. And the main thing that we wanted to do is bridge the gap between multiple talents in different worlds, but having the same feeling. And you can see that with the set build here. We basically have one talent applying lotion, which was one product. We have one talent, which is in a different bathroom, applying a deodorant. And then we have a final talent applying a spray, which is like their body spray. So different points in the day, different feelings, and basically getting ready throughout different world. So this is really achieved with those set builds, and we wanted to make it feel very commercial and very different. A lot of commercial work has set builds. They don't really have bathrooms that are built like this. If you look at them at a glance, they look pretty, but they don't really necessarily make sense. The first shot that I'm going to start off with is the first one that we lit for each scene. This was kind of a tricky one because we had to mark all our positions of our lights as well as the camera position of the dolly and everything like that, so we can get a consistent shot across each of the pieces. As you can see how they're kind of intercut. This is usually done with a robot, but obviously with the budget and time constraints, this is something that we couldn't do. So if I start breaking this down, this was shot on the Sony Bravano. I have a white balance set here at 5600 Kelvin. We shot these on Cooke S4s, so that is a Super 35 lens. And so a 25 millimeter focal length isn't actually like a full frame 25. So it's a little more cropped in. So we shot this actually on a 25. I'm gonna do this in a big overhead because this is gonna make a lot more sense. So we're basically shooting into two walls that we have here. We needed a lot of room to get all these rotation shots and different types of dollies and everything like that. And then here we have this fake shelf that we use to basically jib down and then dolly through. And then I have my camera here, which is sitting on a Cine slider as well as a Pee-wee dolly. And now this was a really difficult one to light because we're dealing with a room that's supposed to feel like a room, but I have two open corners. And we're dealing with a lot of things that we have to light because this is commercial lighting is like almost everything is perfect. I'm gonna start with my key source here, which was using a Nanlite Pavo Slim, and I had this in the vertical direction because we kind of had to fish it in between these two things here. And then I have this set at 5600 Kelvin. And this is basically a very daylight scene, so I kind of kept all my lights daylight balanced. And even though these panels are double diffused with the diffusion that they come with, I like to diffuse it even more. I still find it a little sourcey, so I usually like to put an artificial silk in front of it. So I believe this is 1.5 stops. So we're almost at 4 stops of diffusion just to get that commercial soft look that we're looking for. And this is basically acting as my key light right here. I'll just draw my talent on the side. If you notice that we had a little window here, and we wanted to make sure that this was like a bright early morning feel with that slash on the wall that you can see in the back there. So we have a aperture, this is a 600C, and then we also have this set to daylight, so 5600 Kelvin. This is sitting around like 20%. And this is just with the normal reflector that comes on with it. This light, this was sitting around 50% because we're going through so much diffusion. Not much light needed considering all the diffusion that we have going on there. And then this 600C is lighting up that window as well as giving us a nice edge light on our talent as well. So this is kind of like acting as a rim and kicking her out on the side and really filling out the rest of the shadows and giving a nice edge. And then if we look at the back here, I actually have a tube light which is boomed over, and this is a Titan tube with a honey crate. Titan tubes are really inherently soft, and I like to use them as an edge light because it really gives you that pop, not being too diffused but not being too harsh. And this is probably set at 50%, and this is set to 5600 Kelvin. And then as you can see, we have this slash a light in the background, and that is using one of my favorite light fixtures that I use, which is a 60B. We have this around sitting at 60% because it's a 60B. It's not a lot of power. And then we're at 5600 Kelvin. We had to kind of finesse it in terms of giving us that beam angle. I know it looks like it's coming from this direction and we fished it over, but the reason why we had to push it back so far is to get that spread so it looked as natural as possible. If I fished it over the wall and then had it pointing down, it would kind of be very like triangular and very harsh, and we wouldn't be able to unfocus it. I see a lot of people using spotlight mounts and not in the really correct manner because they don't have a lot of room. In these studio set builds, you do have a lot of room because we're dealing with a bigger space. So we had this all the way backed up in the corner. So we got enough spread as possible, and that's why the power is so high. And then with that spread, we can also unfocus it so it looks like a natural daylight beam coming in. So we have our top-down view here. I'm going to now make a front view, and you'll see why I want to showcase this, because this is how I got my ambient tone. And this is a method I use for all my high key commercials in terms of set builds and studio builds like this. And I really like to use an overhead lighting setup to set my ambient tone that is super soft, and it gives me a lot of room to play with. So if you can imagine, my talent is standing here, and then obviously the camera's in front of them. And then here's the back wall, and then you can see that slash of light going through there. Overhead, we have a 12 by 12, and then I have an artificial silk, so that's 1.5 stops. And then above that, I have a pipe and a series of stands with big bends and everything like that. This is what I usually like to do when we have like temporary rigging, because we don't have a lot of time to hang things from the ceiling. And then we have 2 aperture novas. If I had these lights pointed straight down, we would have a lot more spill that we wouldn't be able to control. I like to kind of cross key them so I have more directionality when I can basically connect them to situs, and I can tell my gaffer to increase one or the other. And then we mainly had this one in play because this was acting as a backlight and acting as our key light, adding more levels to this side of the room. And because we're hitting the silk and spreading everywhere, we kind of have a more bias on this side. This one is just basically acting as my fill. So I would just label this as a key, and then this is as a fill for my ambient room tone. And then this was set at usually 75% for the full day, and this was set at 20%. As you can see, we have very even lighting across the whole field, but we do have a bias on the right side of the image, and this is what that cross keying does. I learned this from a commercial that I was on before that I was actually a gaffer for, and I had the lights originally pointed straight down, but I had to get up on a ladder and adjust them, so I had more flexibility in shaping the light and being more intentional, not just having the whole room lifted, but a certain side of the room that we have more control. So now I can tell my gaffer to basically lift any side of the room that I want. But if we look at our talent specifically, you can see on the light side of the face, and then on the other side, we have something that resembles Rembrandt lighting, but we have different little peaks and valleys of light and dark images. So we have so much interest looking at her face as well as our main subject, because we have so many lights in play. And when we did the truck down, we had to actually shape the light even more because we're getting way too much spill from our main key light here. So I had to put up a floppy right there. And that was just killing the spill, so it didn't spill all over there. But then we found that, this is a little too dark. And that goes back in terms of being a cinematographer and really looking at your image and what are we highlighting. Obviously, we're highlighting her at the beginning, but then we changed the direction and racking focus to the product. So what we're actually going to do is add a little light here. And then this was the Nanlite Pavo Slim 60C. So it's a little square one. The other one, the 120C, was a more rectangle. It gives us more length. And we just need a little light to pop out that. And this was literally sitting at 2% at 5600 Kelvin. And this is just giving some levels back to the product, so we're not going into completely darkness. And we can highlight the product in a subtle reference. We still want to make it feel natural that we're in a cupboard, but we also want the product to be shown in its best light. And we move on to that even further. This is the next shot that we're going to be looking at, which is the main rotation shot across the piece that we really liked and really experimented with. And the one I'm going to focus on is the same character that we're using before because the same lights were in play, having that big soft overhead. But the main thing that we changed here was our key light setup. This was going to be more basically less interest from what we had before. And so that means I have a lot more room to light the subject and really highlight and give it a good ratio, as well as having a big soft source so we get a nice catch light in their eye. So if we draw the room again at a top-down angle, we are using the same camera, same settings, as well as we're using a 25mm lenses. So again, we have the 600C and the 60B in play at 5600 Kelvin, and those lights stayed constant through this shot, but then there are some things in change I'd like to focus on. So if you can imagine, we had the dolly out here, and then this was lifted quite a distance, and then we had basically a big arm that was out with a Mitchell point that was able to rotate. So basically we had the camera at this point, this little square here, and then this was allowed to rotate around that central pivot point. If you want to make a rotation shot look consistent, you have to make sure that your talent is standing under a pivot point. And that pivot point for her specifically was her shoulder, because we wanted to highlight the product. Not necessarily her head or anything like that. So we had to get her, basically her shoulder directly under that. So if I draw my talent here, obviously her shoulder's off to the side, and that gave us our consistent rotation. And to make this consistent across the whole piece in terms of lighting, even where the flats were, we had to tape and mark everything down. And before we even rolled on everything, we had to make sure everything was in its same position. And another good trick that we did as well was take screenshots of each of the shots that we took, and specifically the takes that we liked, and overlaid them on our monitors so we can realign this. And it gave us that effect that it looked like that we were using a robot. At this point, I knew I had a lot of room, so I could really light this in a beauty way that really atones to that really commercial look. So what I did here is I added a fast frame. This is like a 6x4, and then it has like one stop of diffusion. I don't exactly know the material. It's just the one that came with it. And then behind that, I have the IntelliTech. This is the Mega Light Cloth. And then this is like, I would say like a 4x3. And this has a one stop of diffusion on it too. So we're totaling like 2 stops between the two. And they also have a grid on that, so it kills the spill not going across the room. So it's mainly just hitting my talent. And it gives me that nice soft skin that we're looking for in specifically beauty lighting. And then you can see that big catch light in her eye. In the previous shots, you really can't see it because we're using a smaller source here. But in this shot specifically, if you compare it, you can really see that catch light. And then even in her shot here, because we light this consistently across the 3 talents. So if we pause back in this frame here, you can see that the overhead lighting is acting in play again. And then now you can see why I have that bias of those 2 lights angled this way. If I had this one sparked, even at like this was again at 20% and 75%, and then my talent is here. This is acting as a top light as well as another key light that is adding more detail here. The fast frame doesn't reach around to the top of her head, but the frame above her does. And if I had the light on the left acting as my fill, this is acting as like a secondary key, this would flatten her out completely. So here at this moment, we could really play with her contrast ratios and really dial in a look that we're specifically looking for. This is supposed to feel natural but commercial, so you'd have different contrast ratios that you were playing with, but it's very consistent across the look that we're going through here. And then you can see that light in play with the overhead softbox that's coming down, giving her a nice edge light. So whenever I recommend doing any beauty work or any commercials, always try to shoot through a frame or a big light dome, the biggest one that you can. You can't just put a small light dome on a light and then just shine it on your subject. You want to bring that fast frame as close as possible as well as that light fixture, and then just diffuse it with whatever material you have. Literally use shower curtains, find white material on Amazon or anything like that. Or another really good thing is to use book lighting with unbleached muslin or any fabric that you can basically spread out the light. There's so many lighting techniques that you can use, and there's so many DIY and other solutions that we still use to this day. If we wanted to add another stop, we've done this many times where I just throw a white sheet over our fast frame to give us even more diffusion and more softness. The last shot that we're going to be looking at is this product shot. A lot of companies and a lot of people looking for commercial content specifically really like these shots. And what we were really making with this piece is a product commercial that we could sell. It's the same camera, and we're using the 25mm lens because that is the widest that we had. But if we look at a top-down view of this specifically, we have everything else in play. This was a little different from the scenes that we were looking for before, but we're basically shooting this way into this window here. We're looking for something a little bit warmer here, so we have these lights at 4,000 Kelvin, and then my camera's white balance, and we're shooting at 5,600 Kelvin. You can do it any way you want, but I prefer to keep my camera's white balance set throughout the day and then change my lights. And if we were to do a side view, we know that we have that 12x12 in play with those two Novas overhead. Again, pointing back in this way, 20% as our fill, 75% as our key. This is a perfect situation in terms of acting as an ambient key light because this is perfectly lighting in this direction, which is backlit. I know, again, it's spreading across the whole frame, but there is a localized section where it's a lot brighter on this side, and then it's less brighter on this side. And those were the lights in play, but we had to basically spice this up, adding more detail and adding more light onto this. We had the room lit, but we didn't have the product lit. And this is where panel lights come in really handy. And then we had that Pavo Slim. This is the 120C, and this is set at 4,000 Kelvin. And then we had this around 50%. We had this a little brighter in terms of what we're usually working with because I wanted the product to feel a lot brighter to really highlight it and see what's going on. So if we look at the lights and where they are in play, what we had to do is bias the nan light overhead product. So the product is basically attached to the camera right here. And we had biased it like a backlight and then off to the side a bit so we could get more of an edge light. You always want to be backlighting and establishing some shadow. And this is really difficult to do. But the reason why this works so good and looks so good is because we have so many layers of interest in how we lit the whole scene. Mainly what is giving this nice black and rose basically highlight in the back here is the focusing of the curtains. As you can see that the curtains are in the back and it's just giving this really nice salt and pepper. These are the edges of the room here, which gives us nice dark shadows and something dark to look at. And then this is the curtain with a nice gradient across it. And then we just pop the product out even more with that 120C by highlighting the edges and the rim specifically here. And then her hand. And you can see really it's a top light source because there's not really a lot of shadows in her hand. Maybe at the edges here, but basically very top light and very highlighting the edges of the product and bringing out a lot of streaks just to make it very interesting. The main thing that really sells it in terms of product is not necessarily physical interest, but lighting interest and making sure it looks the best in its best light.